Hi, welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I wanted to do a wrap-up of all the books that I read in October. So you've probably heard me gush and gush and gush all of October about how Victober is my absolute favorite reading event of the entire year, and so I'm really excited to share with you the books that I read during Victober and what my thoughts were on them. I've also been putting out weekly Victober vlogs, so all of those have kind of more in-depth thoughts. These will be briefer reviews. So I will link all of those vlogs in the description down below, so that way if you missed any of them, you can check them out and hear kind of my more in-depth thoughts on the books that I read. I had a great reading month for the month of October, which is wonderful because September was rough. I did not finish that many books, and the only books I finished physically were mangas and like one or two middle grades. Like, I had a garbage reading month. I had a wonderful reading month. I had a couple of books that were 3 stars. Most of the books that I read were 4 stars, and then I had 1 5-star. I completed 8 books and 10 short stories, which, considering how little I read in September, is just a huge victory. So I'm kind of like happy dancing over here over the reading that I got done. I've decided that I'm just gonna go in chronological order. A lot of times I separate them out into star ratings, but to be honest, I'm feeling a little lazy, so I'm just gonna go in the order that I completed them. The first book that I finished this month is An Autumn War by Daniel Abraham. Oh my goodness, I really enjoyed this one. This was a 4-star read for me, and it's book 3 in the Long Price Quartet. So I still have to read the final book, which is The Price of Spring. I loved book 1 of this series. It was such a good book, such an interesting fantasy world. It's kind of like Asian inspired, and there's a lot of political intrigue. Book 1 is super like slow and methodical in its pacing and establishing the world, and the magic system is super interesting. You have these creatures called ondats, which are basically like, they're kind of like spirits, but they're also like ideas that are captured by these people called poets, who find like these words to bind these ideas into physical beings that have powers based on those ideas, which sounds super complicated, and it kind of is, but Daniel Abraham does a way better job of explaining it than I do. When someone tells me this is a slower paced, political based fantasy, I'm in. Like, I love politics and fantasy, which is hilarious because I hate politics in real life, but I love political intrigue in fantasies. So it had that going for it. Book 2, read that and was so disappointed by it. Oh my gosh, it takes place like 10 years after the first one. And so you've got some of the same characters, but I didn't like hardly anyone, especially the female characters. I hated them all. It was just like, why can this man not write female characters that are actually likable? And just kind of was not motivated to pick up the 3rd book. And finally did, because both Penny and Dia were like, you got to read this whole thing. The whole thing wraps up and everything is so good together. And I haven't even read book 4, but book 3 was so good. It like redeemed my hope in this series. The next book that I completed in October was The Warden by Anthony Trollope. I buddy read this with Amy of Hearthridge, and I think it was both of our first Trollope. I know it was mine, but I think it was Amy's too, but I'm not 100% sure. And my goodness, this book is really, really interesting and good. Like, it's different. It's so slow. And so there were moments that it just kind of dragged a bit for me. So this was not a perfect book for me. This was a 4-star book. Super solid, really enjoyed it. Really looking forward to continuing on with the Barsetshire Chronicles. I felt like the character development was so good, and I felt like the relationships were just so well written, particularly the relationships of the warden with his daughter and then the warden with the bishop. Both of those relationships were just so well written, and I loved the warden as a character. He's just so good. I really enjoyed this book a lot. The next book that I completed during the month of October is Romanov by Nadine Brandes. Like, what a cover, right? Isn't this so pretty? I was really looking forward to reading this book because I read Fox by Nadine Brandes a couple of years ago, and I think I rated it like 3.5 stars because it was enjoyable, but it had some tropes and some other things in it that I didn't love because it is a YA, and there are things that are commonly in YA books that I just don't love, unfortunately. This is also a YA, and it's in a similar vein to Fox in that this is a historical fantasy. So it takes real events, real people, and puts a fantastical twist on them. So in this case, it's with the Romanov family, and there's this whole thing of like spell casting to be able to heal people and do certain things. And as it turns out, you know, Rasputin was one of the best spellcasters, and so he was killed for it because the Bolsheviks hate the spellcasting thing, and that's one of the things that they have against the Romanov family, although not the only thing, because the historical reasons are in here as well, but the magical reasons are included as well. And so I love Russian history. I love stuff about like really any time period in Russian history, but I found this like super fascinating and really just enjoyed this exploration of the Romanovs family's time in exile, kind of leading up to the massacre of their family. I found this to be like a really well done and beautiful book about really like the power of forgiveness was the overarching theme of this book. And I felt like it wasn't heavy-handed in its spirituality. I really loved it, honestly. And it's made me want to continue on and read more about the Romanov family. If you've watched my November TBR, you already know that I have a book about the Romanov sisters on my November TBR for Nonfiction November, because I just keep thinking about it and I want to learn more about like what really happened as opposed to a fictionalized account. Next up was an audiobook that I listened to with my husband on the way to and from our trip to Gulf Shores, and that's Third Girl by Agatha Christie. This is a Poirot mystery, and it's basically about this girl. She comes into Poirot, he has no clue who she is, and she's like, I think I might have committed a murder. And then she disappears. And so he's trying to figure out who she is, what happened, did she actually commit a murder, or what is going on there? And so it's pretty interesting. This was a reread for me, and I rated it 3 stars upon my first read of it, and I kept it the same on Goodreads, although three stars usually means that I probably wouldn't reread it, but it was still a decent book, and I might more put it towards 3.5. There are elements to the ending that just, I don't know, some Agatha Christie endings, you're like, oh my goodness, like, whoa, like it blows your mind and you're like, I should have seen this coming. This is so good. And this was not that. And so the ending lowered it for me a bit, but I found the premise really interesting. Also, the audiobook was narrated by Hugh Fraser, who is Captain Hastings in the Poirot TV series with David Suchet. And he is like the best narrator for Poirot books. I love it so much. Next up is a book that I brought with me when we went to Alabama, and I started there because it just fit the atmosphere so well. That's Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Peltz. This is a contemporary story about a giant octopus that lives in an aquarium in the Pacific Northwest, and this older lady who's experiencing grief and loss, and they kind of like have this connection. And if that was all that the story was, I think that I would have liked it a lot more. I think I officially gave this like 3 stars on Goodreads because I felt kind of bad leaving any sort of review that was less than that, because this is a debut novel. And for a debut novel, it's not bad, but I really didn't love it. I actually considered DNFing it and decided to stick with it. And at the end was like, I should have DNF'd it. So it's probably more like a 2 or a 2.5 star if I'm being honest. But there were elements to it that I really did enjoy. I loved Marcellus, the giant octopus. Some of the perspectives are his, and those are the best part of the story. I loved Tova, the older lady who has kind of befriended this octopus, and I really just liked her. But then there's another character who is like this 30-year-old, and he's the worst. He's the worst. He's such an annoying perspective that it completely tanked the book for me. Like, I just didn't like him. He basically, I mean, he had been through things in his life. You know, his mom was an addict and left him with his aunt when he was 9 years old, and he has no clue who his dad is. So part of this book is him like seeking to find his dad, and he ends up in the same town as Tova in this octopus. So the storylines converge. But like, he victimizes himself so much. Like, I realized that he had been through things in his childhood, but he had an aunt who really loved him, provided for him, spoiled him, like took care of him. And he basically just used his mom as an excuse for why he was unable to hold down a job or keep a relationship or be a responsible or likable human at all. And I just like, he was a giant man baby and I just wanted to slap him. I'm like, he is really close to my age. He has no reason for like acting this way. I was just so annoyed by him, and I was able to see the conclusion of the novel, and it just wasn't worth it for me. It wasn't a terrible book, but I also didn't think it was a great book. If this author writes another book, I would consider picking it up because there are elements to it I liked, and maybe her second book will be better than her debut. The next book that I completed, this was actually towards the end of the month. I finished like 3 books within just like 2 days. One of those was Orion and the Starborn by K.B. Hoyle. I am so thankful I got a physical arc of this from Owl's Nest Publishing, and I read K.B. Hoyle's other book through Owl's Nest Publishing, Son of the Deep, earlier this year. Enjoyed that one, but this one is a middle grade sci-fi, and like the cover is incredible. I love it so much. So this is about a young boy who lives in Atlanta with his grandma, and he's kind of always felt like maybe he doesn't quite fit in. He feels different than the other kids. And then as it turns out, he is not from this planet at all. He's actually from a planet in Orion's belt, which I think is here. Like, Orion's belt is actually like another solar system. Like, we think it's stars from Earth and we don't realize that it's actually another solar system, and he is from one of the planets there. So then he's taken to the planet and he gets enrolled in school there, and that is just like my favorite middle grade trope. I love the magical school trope. This is a sci-fi, so it's a little less magical and a little more sci-fi, but as it turns out, like, different people, like the people from each planet have a different ability, so it's a little bit magical in that way. And he's going to school and he's learning about his abilities, learning about the history of these planets, and it's just like, it's so good. I love it so much. There's like political and royal intrigue, and there's things happening, and there's a lot of mystery and shrouding. Who is Orion? Why was he taken away? Why is he being brought back now? There are people who are trying to kill him, which you find out in like the very first chapter or maybe the second chapter. So that's not a spoiler. So it's like, why are people trying to kill him? Like, what's going on? It was amazing. I gave it 5 stars. This is totally my jam in a middle grade. This is everything that I want a middle grade to be. Like, it has all my favorite tropes, and I loved it so much. I will say that some of the plot twists were kind of predictable for me, but it didn't detract from my enjoyment at all. It was exactly what I was in the mood to read, and I just loved it. I love it so much. It was so much fun. My only complaint is that this is clearly book 1 in a series, and I don't know how long I'm gonna have to wait for the next book. The same day I finished A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, and I went into this book with a lot of trepidation, and I think I have mentioned that on this channel. I have tried to read this book multiple times in high school and as a young adult, and never got more than a couple chapters in before I was just like, eh, and like tossed it. I was much more of a mood reader then, so I was like, I will finish it this time. So I read it with Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot, and we both were like, okay, we both had we weren't sure going into it, and we both ended up enjoying it, and we both rated it 4 stars. So I am so glad that I read this book, and honestly, it kind of hooked me right from the beginning. I was really surprised. I was expecting it to take me a while to get into. A lot of people had told me that it takes a while to get into. I had one person like very specifically tell me that it was like page 105 or something like that, that was when it really picked up. For me, immediately I was sucked in. And I think part of that is that I just love Dickens' writing. And so when he's writing about mist swirling and like the atmosphere in the cities of Paris and London, like I'm immediately like, yes, I love it. And then also there was just a lot of humor in this as well, even at the beginning. And so both of those things kind of like hooked me in even before I had any clue, like where is the story going? Because I really didn't know. But I do think that this is one of Dickens' more tight plots, in that there are characters, but there's not a bajillion characters and a bajillion different plot lines that finally converge at the end. We can see the connections between the characters pretty early on, and so that made it a little easier to read. I will say that the reason that this is not a 5-star book is I did not feel quite as attached to the characters as I do in most Dickens novels. I end up crying multiple times usually at the ending of a Dickens novel, and I didn't cry at all. I feel bad about that because the ending should have made me cry. Like, a lot of people have told me this is my favorite Dickens because of the ending, and I can see why now that I've read the ending. I think it is like a killer ending. Like, it's so good. It's like a gut punch of an ending. Although I will say that I saw it coming like several hundred pages before it happened. I kind of was like, I think I know where this is going. And that is where it went. So I was not really surprised by most of the ending. There were some reveals that I was surprised by, but the actual ending part with a certain character that everyone's like, oh my gosh, I actually did see that coming, unfortunately. But I didn't cry at the ending, and I don't know, most of the main characters I just didn't feel as attached to. I actually was more attached to the side characters, and I felt like some of the main characters felt more like side characters, just because I didn't feel like there was as much detail about their lives and who they were as people, and so they just felt a little bit more bland to me. Unfortunately, I wish that that wasn't the case, but I still enjoyed it. I'm super glad I read it. I will reread it at some point in my life. It's a very solid 4-star, and it's not my least favorite Dickens. Bleak House still holds that spot, unfortunately. Although I did like Bleak House, and I cried at the end of Bleak House. So a least favorite Dickens is still a pretty solid book, but yeah, this isn't a new favorite, but I liked it so much more than I was anticipating. The last complete book that I finished during the month of October is Breaking Stalin's Nose by Eugene Yelchin. I kind of picked this up on a whim. I wasn't feeling well, and I was like, I want to read something, but do I really want to start something new? Because I had finished all my other books. This book is super short, big print, lots of pictures. Takes place during the Stalinist regime, as you might be able to tell by the title. It's about a young boy, Sasha, and his dad has been lauded by Stalin, has received awards from Stalin, and is considered like a great person. And this little boy idolizes Stalin, wants to be just like Stalin, can't wait to join the Young Pioneers. It's actually pretty disturbing to read his love of Stalin. It's hard to read. Then some events transpire, and kind of his whole world is thrown into disarray, and he's kind of faced with like, is the way that I've always thought about this the way that life really is? And so it's a very thought-provoking, very reflective book, and it's written by someone who actually grew up under communist Soviet Union. It was a really good read. This was actually on my 5-star predictions, and it wasn't quite a 5-star for me. Still 4 stars. Really enjoyed it. It's one that I really do want my daughter to read because I think that there's a lot to glean from this, and the artwork really adds to it as well. The author also illustrated it. He's an artist as well. And there's an interview with him in the back of the book that was also very impactful about like what it was like to grow up in the Soviet Union. It was such a great book. Really glad I read it. Then, like I said, I read 10 short stories. Not really going to go into detail with any of them, I don't think. I read a couple of short stories with Kelly from Cozy Reader Kelly of Poe. We read a lot of Poe together last October, and this October we only ended up reading a couple together. I think she read more than me, but because she started before me, there were certain ones that we were planning to read that she's like, don't read that one. It's not very good. So I think we had a list of like 6, and she read through them before I did, so she had ones to recommend and then ones that she's like, yeah, no, don't read that one. So I read two of them. I read Silence and I read The Sphinx. And I think both of those were under like the satire section in this, because he wrote a lot more than just like mystery and horror. That's what he's known for, but there's like fantasy and satire in this as well. And Silence was pretty good. It was interesting. I liked it more than Kelly did. Kelly didn't really enjoy that one as much. The Sphinx, I really, really loved The Sphinx. I just thought it was just very good examination on how fear clouds our judgment. Then for Victober, I was reading some Oscar Wilde short stories with Dia, and this collection that I have has 9 of his short stories in it. We have almost finished them. Well, she has finished them. I am halfway through the very last one, which is The Fisherman and His Soul. So I didn't quite finish all of it in October, but the Victober prompt was to read 1 Victorian short story, and I read 8. So more than filled it. I'm gonna go ahead and just say that this collection of short stories is 5 stars. Love it so much. There's so far been only 1 short story that I haven't enjoyed as much, and that one's A Devoted Friend, in case you're wondering. I love all the other ones in here. I think maybe The Happy Prince is still my favorite, which is the first one, but I really have liked some of the later ones that are longer. I really loved The Star Child. I just thought that one was phenomenal. That's one of my favorites too. And The Remarkable Rocket is really, really funny. That's a shorter one. And The Rose and the Nightingale was very thought-provoking. But it's been such a joy to read these with Dia, because we just like dove deep. Because on the surface level, these stories are great and they contain like some sort of moral. A lot of them feel kind of like Aesop's fables, and there's a couple that feel a little bit more fairy tale like. There are things to glean from the surface level, but there are so many details in them that you can just dive deep and dissect them, and that is what Dia and I did, and that just like enhanced the reading so much more. Like, I would have loved these anyway on their own, and this would have been a 5-star collection anyway. But with reading it with Dia and dissecting it so much and diving so deep, I mean, can I go above a 5-star? Because I would for that. The reading experience was just so heightened, and I just loved reading this with Dia. There's a couple other books that I started in October that I didn't finish, one of which was my prime audiobook for the month, and that's North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I pretty much finished it. I have 1 hour left. It's November 1st. I have 1 hour left. So I'm really close to finishing it. I'll probably finish it today. I don't know if I should technically include it as a review in this wrap up, but this is a reread for me, so I guess I can kind of review it. I liked it more than I liked it the first time. I had a video where I talked about books that I felt like I rated them too low the first time I read them, and this was on the list because I rated it 2 stars because I was so disappointed by it. I had been told it's like Pride and Prejudice, only better, and it's not. It's not like Pride and Prejudice. The main romance has some similar elements in terms of like miscommunication and pride kind of getting in the way of like talking to someone about your differences and, you know, actually working through things. But other than that, it's not the same at all. It's very serious compared to Austen, and it talks a lot about the industrialization of Northern England, and that is a huge portion of this book. So it's much more serious and has more of a message, I think, than Pride and Prejudice does. I will say that I enjoyed it way more upon a reread, even though I haven't finished it yet. I would probably right now maybe 4 stars, 3.5 or 4. I'm trying to decide. I already know the ending's coming, and one of my biggest beefs with it is like the build up and then the ending is like, and I hate that. But I also recognize that it's not Gaskell's fault. It was a serial and they told her, wrap it up, girl, this is too long. And so she had to like finish it super quickly, and that really shows, unfortunately. I was hoping it would be like 5-star and I'd be like, yes, now I get why everyone loves it so much. And I'm still kind of like, still not a favorite for me. But I haven't read any other Gaskell, and I'm hoping to remedy that soon. The other book that I started and didn't finish, started it as an audiobook with my husband on the way to Alabama, and that's The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. And I got about 1/3 of the way through this, and then my audiobook went back, and I waited months for that audiobook. Like 3 months. And then I only had it for 2 weeks and then it was gone. And so I got it physically from my library and I've read a couple chapters of it physically and I'm not enjoying it physically. I liked it audio, but I'm not really liking it physically all that much. So I don't even know if I'll finish it, but I'm kind of leaving it open-ended for now. But the last time I was like, maybe I should finish this, but I'm just not sure, was Remarkably Bright Creatures, and I wish that I hadn't wasted time finishing it because I could have read other books. So I might DNF it, but I'm just not sure yet. Wow, sorry, this was like a really long video. That was not my intention to make this so long, but that is what I read in the month of October. So I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. What did you read? Did you participate in Victober? If you did you enjoy what you read? Have you read any of the same books that I read that I mentioned here? And if so, what were your thoughts? Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me. I will see you again next time.